Picture this. November 15th, 1978. The Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia are shrouded in an early morning mist that clings to the valleys like ghostly fingers. At exactly 5:47 a.m., 41 men gather at the entrance of the Blackwood Mining Company, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. These aren't just statistics. These are fathers, sons, brothers. Men like Bobby Martinez, who had promised his 6-year-old daughter he'd help her with homework that evening. Men like Samuel Tucker, celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary that weekend. They punch their time cards, check their equipment, and descend into the earth just as they had done thousands of times before. But November 15th, 1978 would be different, because at 6:15 p.m. that evening, when the shift whistle echoed across the mountains, not a single one of these 41 men would emerge in the darkness below. What happened in the depths of Blackwood Mine defies every conventional explanation. No explosion, no cave-in, no gas leak. Just 41 human beings who walked into the earth and simply vanished. The story you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about missing persons cases. And by the end, you'll understand why this case was buried by authorities for nearly 5 decades. The Blackwood Mine had been operational since 1923, carved deep into the coal-rich mountains of Pocahontas County. By 1978, it employed over 200 men across 3 shifts, but the morning crew was considered the elite, experienced miners who knew every tunnel, every support beam, every potential danger that lurked in the labyrinthine passages below. Thomas Crawford had been the shift supervisor for 12 years, a gruff, no-nonsense man with callous hands and eyes that had seen too much. Crawford took pride in his safety record. In those 12 years, he had never lost a single man under his watch. That morning, as he conducted the routine safety briefing, something felt different. Equipment check was normal. Crawford would later tell investigators, his voice barely above a whisper. But the men, they seemed restless, more nervous than usual. The nervousness wasn't without reason. For 3 weeks prior to November 15th, workers had been reporting unusual occurrences in the deeper sections of the mine. Strange echoes that didn't match the natural acoustics of the tunnels. Shadows that moved independently of their light sources. Most disturbing of all, a persistent vibration that seemed to emanate from below, far below the deepest operational levels. Veteran miner James Kowalski had approached Crawford just 2 days earlier with concerns that went beyond normal workplace anxiety. "Tom," he had said, his weathered face etched with worry, "there's something wrong down there. The air feels heavy, different. And last Tuesday, I swear I heard voices coming from Tunnel 7, but that section's been sealed for 15 years. Crawford had dismissed these reports as pre-winter jitters, the kind of psychological pressure that came with longer nights and shorter days. The Appalachian Mountains had always been fertile ground for superstition and folklore. But as he watched his crew gather their equipment that morning, men who had faced cave-ins, gas leaks, and every conceivable mining disaster, he noticed something he had never seen before, genuine fear in their eyes. The descent began at 6 a.m. sharp. The industrial elevator, a massive steel cage that could hold 20 men at a time, made 3 trips to transport the full crew to Level 4, approximately 800 feet below the surface. This was standard operating procedure. Level 4 housed the richest coal seams and had been the primary work area for the past 6 months. What wasn't standard was the silence that greeted them. Mine foreman Eddie Reeves, who operated the surface controls, later described an eerie quiet that seemed to swallow the usual sounds of the operation. Normally, you'd hear the pneumatic drills start up within minutes. Reeves told the State Investigation Board. The conveyor belts, the ventilation fans, the chatter of the men. But that morning, after the elevator came back up empty, nothing, just this dead silence that made my skin crawl. At 10:30 a.m., Crawford's voice crackled over the radio for the last time. "Surface. This is Level 4. We're moving into the eastern section. Some kind of structural anomaly down here we need to investigate. We'll radio again in 2 hours." That was the last communication from the depths of Blackwood Mine. When noon came and went without contact, Reeves attempted to raise the crew multiple times. When 2 p.m. arrived with continued silence, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He called for an emergency response. But as the first rescue team prepared to descend into the mine, they discovered something that made no sense whatsoever. The elevator sensors showed it had never been activated since the last crew went down. According to mechanical logs, the cage was sitting at level 4, exactly where it should be, but when they brought it to the surface, it was completely empty. How do 41 men simply disappear from a sealed underground environment with only one way in or out? The first rescue team descended at 3:47 p.m., their powerful halogen lights cutting through the stagnant air of level 4. What they found defied every protocol and emergency response manual. The work area was frozen in time. Lunch boxes sat open on improvised tables, sandwiches with single bites taken from them. Coffee still steamed in metal thermoses. A playing card game was spread across a wooden crate. Someone had been dealt a straight flush, but never had the chance to play it. Personal items were scattered throughout the area as if the men had simply vanished mid-activity. But it was the equipment that truly bewildered investigators. Pneumatic drills stood upright, still connected to their air hoses. Safety helmets hung on hooks, as if carefully placed there. Most disturbing of all, 41 mining lamps were found in a perfect circle near the center of the work area, their beams pointing inward toward a spot on the tunnel floor that showed signs of recent excavation. Captain Maria Santos, leading the rescue operation, radioed her findings to the surface with a voice that betrayed her confusion. "Surface control, this is Rescue 1. We have a situation down here that I've never encountered in 23 years of emergency response. The work area appears to have been deliberately arranged. All personal safety equipment is accounted for and properly positioned, but there are no signs of the crew." The rescue team expanded their search to every accessible tunnel on level 4. Emergency protocols required checking all secondary passages, storage areas, and even the sealed sections that had been closed due to unstable conditions. They found nothing. No signs of struggle, no evidence of accident or injury, no indication that the men had ever attempted to leave their designated work area. At 7:22 p.m., a second discovery sent chills through the rescue operation. In Tunnel 7, the same sealed passage that James Kowalski had mentioned hearing voices from, investigators found fresh boot prints in the cold dust. 41 distinct sets of footprints leading deeper into the tunnel, towards sections that hadn't been mapped since the 1940s. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a geological engineer brought in to assess structural integrity, made a discovery that would haunt the investigation for decades. The footprints, she reported, show no signs of distress or hurried movement. They're evenly spaced, methodical, as if the men were walking calmly towards something specific. But here's what doesn't make sense. Tunnel 7 has been sealed with reinforced concrete barriers for 15 years due to unstable ground conditions. The barriers are intact, unbroken, yet somehow these men walk through solid concrete. As darkness fell on the mountain, families gathered at the mine entrance. Wives, children, parents, all waiting for news that would never come. Sarah Martinez clutched her 6-year-old daughter's hand as she stared into the mouth of the mine that had swallowed her husband. "Bobby said something strange that morning," she whispered to investigators. "He said he'd been having dreams about voices calling to him from deep underground. I thought it was just work stress." The local authorities were baffled. Sheriff David Coleman had worked missing persons cases for 3 decades, but nothing had prepared him for this. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it," he admitted to reporters. "People don't just disappear from a controlled underground environment. There has to be a logical explanation." But as the hours turned to days, that logical explanation remained frustratingly elusive. By midnight, with no signs of the missing men and growing concerns about the structural integrity of the mine, the decision was made to seal Blackwood Mine indefinitely. The official report cited ongoing safety concerns and inconclusive search results. What the official report didn't mention was a discovery made by the final rescue team at 11:47 p.m., deep in Tunnel 7, beyond where any footprint should have been possible. They found a message carved into the tunnel wall. Fresh carving, done with mining tools. In shaky letters it read, "We heard the calling. We had to follow. Tell our families we're sorry." Below the message, 41 signatures were carved into the stone. But how could men who had vanished hours earlier have carved their own names into a tunnel that was supposedly inaccessible? What do you think is really happening so far? Share your theories in the comments. The investigation that followed will become one of the most controversial and heavily classified missing persons cases in American history. FBI agent Rebecca Morrison arrived from the Charleston field office 3 days after the disappearance, expecting a routine missing persons case with a probable mining accident explanation. What she found would consume the next 2 years of her career and leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about reality. The physical evidence was impossible. Morrison later testified in closed congressional hearings, documents that wouldn't be declassified until 2019. Every mining disaster leaves traces, debris, gas residue, structural damage, something. Blackwood Mine showed none of these indicators. It was as if 41 people had been surgically removed from reality. The Geological Survey team brought in specialized equipment to map every inch of the accessible tunnels. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors, thermal imaging. Every tool available in 1978 was deployed to locate the missing men. The results were consistently baffling. Dr. Michael Chun, a seismologist from West Virginia University, discovered something that made him question his instruments. The radar showed cavities, he explained in his confidential report. Large empty spaces below level for that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey or mining blueprint. But when we attempted to access these areas, we found solid rock. The readings suggested massive hollow spaces, but physical drilling encountered nothing but limestone bedrock. More disturbing were the audio recordings captured by the sensitive equipment. In the deepest accessible tunnels, microphones picked up what sounded like human voices, but the acoustic analysis revealed something impossible. The voices appeared to be coming from below the bedrock, from spaces that geological science insisted couldn't exist. Agent Morrison focused her investigation on the human element, conducting extensive interviews with families, co-workers, and anyone who had contact with the missing miners in the weeks before their disappearance. What emerged was a pattern that sent chills through the investigative team. 17 of the 41 men had reported identical dreams in the 2 weeks prior to November 15th. Dreams of voices calling their names from deep underground, promising them something they had always wanted. Dreams of walking through solid rock as if it were water, descending to chambers filled with impossible light. Margaret Kowalski, James's wife, provided testimony that would later be sealed under national security provisions. James started sleepwalking, she told Morrison. 3 nights before he disappeared, I found him in our backyard at 2 a.m. digging. Just digging straight down with his bare hands, muttering about going home to the light. When I woke him up, he had no memory of it, but his hands were bloody, and he had dirt under his fingernails that didn't match our soil. It was different, older, like it came from deep underground. The breakthrough came when Morrison obtained the mine's original construction documents from 1923. Hidden in the architectural plans, she discovered references to Subsection X, a series of natural caverns that had been deliberately sealed and omitted from all operational maps. According to the documents, these caverns had been discovered during initial excavation and immediately classified under a little-known federal mining regulation that dealt with geological anomalies of national security interest. More shocking was a handwritten note in the margin of the original blueprints. Subsection X sealed per federal directive, anomalous electromagnetic readings, and unexplained acoustic phenomena. Recommend permanent closure and classification under Project Deep Echo. Project Deep Echo, a name that would lead Morrison down a rabbit hole of classified military experiments and government cover-ups that stretched back to the early days of the Cold War. Thank you for staying with us. The most shocking part is still coming. The classified documents that Agent Morrison uncovered through federal subpoenas painted a picture that was far more sinister than a simple mining accident. Project Deep Echo, initiated in 1952, was a joint operation between the Department of Defense and a shadowy research division known only as Geological Assets and Anomalies Management. The project's stated goal was to investigate and catalog unusual geological formations with potential strategic value. What this meant in practice was a systematic study of locations across the United States where conventional physics seemed to break down, places where radio signals behaved strangely, where magnetic compasses spun wildly, where people reported hearing voices that had no identifiable source. The Blackwood site had been flagged in 1954 after a preliminary mining survey detected what researchers called temporal acoustic echoes, sounds that appear to be traveling backward through time. When miners in the early 1950s reported hearing voices speaking their names before they had even introduced themselves to their crews, the site was immediately brought under federal oversight. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, a quantum physicist who had worked on Project Deep Echo until its supposed termination in 1971, agreed to speak with Morrison under condition of anonymity. What she revealed would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. The caverns beneath Blackwood weren't natural. Dr. Vasquez explained during their clandestine meeting in a Washington, D.C. hotel room. Our geological analysis suggested they were impossibly old, older than the mountain itself, which makes no scientific sense. But more disturbing was the way they affected human consciousness. Extended exposure to the electromagnetic fields emanating from these spaces caused subjects to report compulsions, irresistible urges to venture deeper underground. The experiments conducted at Blackwood between 1954 and 1971 involved volunteer subjects, researchers, military personnel, and eventually civilian contractors who were told they were participating in routine geological surveys. What they were actually studying was the effect of what Dr. Vasquez termed consciousness-affecting geological phenomena. We lost 12 people during the research phase, Dr. Vasquez admitted, her voice heavy with decades of suppressed guilt. They would descend into the deeper caverns and simply not return. Search teams would find their equipment arranged in perfect geometric patterns, but the individuals themselves were gone. We theorized that the electromagnetic anomalies were creating some kind of doorway, not a physical passage, but something that affected the fundamental nature of matter and consciousness. The project was supposedly terminated in 1971 after a catastrophic incident involving an entire research team. But according to Dr. Vasquez, monitoring equipment had remained in place, hidden throughout the mine, continuously recording data and transmitting it to an undisclosed government facility. Morrison's investigation revealed that in the weeks leading up to November 15, 1978, this monitoring equipment had detected unprecedented electromagnetic activity. The readings were so far beyond normal parameters that automated alerts had been triggered at multiple federal agencies. Someone, somewhere, had known that something was going to happen at Blackwood Mine. Local residents, when finally convinced to speak freely, provided testimony that painted a picture of escalating strangeness in the months before the disappearance. Emma Patterson, who lived in a farmhouse 3 miles from mine, described lights that danced beneath the ground at night, visible through cracks in her basement floor. It started in September, she recalled. These blue-white lights that would pulse like a heartbeat. My animals wouldn't go near the barn, and my well water started tasting metallic. Perhaps most disturbing was a testimony of Dr. Henry Morrison, no relation to Agent Morrison, the town's only physician. In October 1978, he had treated 7 miners from Blackwood for what he described as synchronized sleep disturbances. All 7 men reported identical nightmares occurring at exactly the same time each night, 3:33 a.m. They described dreams of walking through solid rock, Dr. Morrison explained. Dreams of chambers filled with impossible geometry, where gravity seemed optional and time moved in strange loops. What concerned me medically was that these weren't isolated cases. 7 different men, with no social contact outside of work, experiencing identical psychological phenomena that suggest an external cause, something environmental affecting their brain chemistry. By November 1978, it became clear that the federal monitoring systems had detected something significant approaching. Internal memos obtained through Morrison's investigation referenced imminent threshold events and consciousness displacement probability exceeding acceptable parameters. The most damning evidence came from surveillance tape that had been sealed in federal archives. Recorded by hidden cameras in the mine, it showed the 41 miners on the morning of November 15th, working normally until approximately 10:15 a.m. At that moment, every man in the mine stopped what he was doing and turned toward the sealed entrance of Tunnel 7. They stood motionless for exactly 93 seconds, then, moving in perfect unison, began walking toward the barrier that had supposedly kept them out of the deeper passages for 15 years. The tape showed them approaching the concrete barrier and walking through it as if it were made of mist. If you're still here, get ready. The final truth will change everything you thought you knew. The final pieces of Blackwood Mine puzzle would only come together in 2019, when a deathbed confession from former Project Deep Echo researcher Dr. Carl Winters revealed the true scope of what had been discovered beneath the West Virginia mountains. Dr. Winters, dying of lung cancer at age 89, contacted investigative journalist Sarah Chung with a story that would finally explain the disappearance of the 41 miners. According to Winters, the caverns beneath Blackwood Mine were not geological formations at all, but something far more extraordinary and terrifying. We call them consciousness wells, Dr. Winters explained in his recorded testimony. Locations where the boundary between mental reality and physical reality had somehow worn thin. People who spent extended time near these wells began to experience what we termed reality drift, the ability to phase between different layers of existence. The government's interest in these phenomena went far beyond scientific curiosity. During the Cold War, the potential military applications of consciousness manipulation technology were considered invaluable. Project Deep Echo was tasked with understanding and potentially weaponizing these natural anomalies. The 41 miners, Dr. Winters continued, were not victims of an accident. They were the final test subjects in an experiment that had been running for 25 years. We have been exposing miners to low-level electromagnetic fields designed to increase their sensitivity to the consciousness wells. The goal was to create soldiers who could phase through physical barriers, becoming the ultimate infiltration force. The electromagnetic exposure explained the synchronized dreams, the sleepwalking incidents, and the growing compulsion that the miners felt to venture into the sealed sections of the mine. They were being psychologically conditioned, their consciousness gradually attuned to frequencies that would allow them to access the impossible spaces hidden beneath Blackwood. On November 15, 1978, the conditioning reached critical mass. Surveillance footage that was never released to the public showed the miners moving through Tunnel 7's concrete barriers not because the barriers had failed, but because the men had achieved a state of consciousness that allowed them to exist partially outside normal physical reality. They walked through solid matter the same way a radio wave passes through a wall, by existing at a frequency that didn't interact with conventional matter. But where did they go? According to Dr. Winters' final testimony, the consciousness wells beneath Blackwood connected to a vast underground network that existed in a parallel dimensional space. The 41 miners had successfully transitioned to this alternative layer reality, but the process was irreversible with 1970s technology. They're not dead, Dr. Winters insisted with his dying breath. They exist in a space adjacent to our reality, trapped between dimensions. Sometimes, under specific electromagnetic conditions, sensitive individuals can still hear them calling from below. The government's official response to Dr. Winters' revelations was swift and decisive. All Project Deep Echo documentation was reclassified at the highest security levels. The Blackwood mine site was purchased by the federal government and declared an environmental hazard zone, permanently off limits to civilian access. But the story doesn't end there. In 2020, hikers in the Pocahontas County wilderness began reporting strange phenomena near the former Blackwood site. Voices echoing from underground, calling out names and messages for families who had lost loved ones decades earlier. Electromagnetic anomalies that cause electronic devices to malfunction in a perfect circle around the sealed mine entrance. Most disturbing are the testimonies from relatives of the missing miners. Sarah Martinez, now 52 years old, claims she still receives messages from her father Bobby through her dreams. He tells me he's waiting. She says, waiting in a place where time moves differently, where 41 men have been trying to find their way home for over 40 years. Local paranormal investigators have recorded dozens of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, sessions near the site, capturing what appear to be the voices of the missing miners, still calling out from somewhere beneath the mountain. Geological surveys continue to detect the same impossible hollow spaces that baffled researchers in 1978, spaces that exist according to every sensor but cannot be physically accessed. The truth about Blackwood Mine represents one of the most significant cover-ups in American history, a case where the government pursuit of paranormal military advantages led to the sacrifice of 41 innocent men. These men weren't victims of a mining accident. They were casualties of an experiment that pushed the boundaries of reality itself. Today, the families of the Blackwood 41 continue to seek answers. They filed lawsuits against the federal government, demanding the release of all Project Deep Echo documentation and access to the sealed mine site. Their legal battle continues, supported by growing evidence that their loved ones may still exist, trapped in a dimensional space that conventional rescue operations cannot reach. The electromagnetic anomalies beneath the Blackwood site remain active. Government monitoring equipment, still operational after more than 4 decades, continues to detect the same consciousness-affecting phenomena that first attracted Project Deep Echo's attention, which raises the most disturbing question of all. If the experiment that claimed 41 lives was supposedly terminated in 1978, why are the monitoring systems still active? And what exactly are they still monitoring? The mystery of the Blackwood 41 remains officially unsolved, their disappearance attributed to an unknown mining accident with no recoverable evidence. But the testimonies of Dr. Winters, the classified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, and the ongoing electromagnetic phenomena at the site tell a different story entirely. 41 men walked into the earth on November 15, 1978, and crossed a threshold between realities that science is only beginning to understand. Their sacrifice was not voluntary, but their story serves as a haunting reminder of how far governments will go in pursuit of power, even when that pursuit leads them into realms that humanity was never meant to explore. The voices that echo from beneath the West Virginia mountains may be more than just paranormal phenomena. They may be the desperate calls of men who have been waiting 46 years for someone to find a way to bring them home. If you found this story as disturbing as we did, let us know what you think really happened to the Blackwood miners in the comments below. Have you heard of similar cases where people have vanished under impossible circumstances? We read every comment, and your theories help guide our future investigations into the world's most baffling mysteries. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the thin line between reality and the impossible, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the cases that authorities don't want you to know about. Because the truth, no matter how strange or frightening, deserves to be told. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about the world around you. Because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones hiding in plain sight. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.